All right, so for those of you that don't know me, my name is Zachary Halstead. Today I'm going to present the migration for 11.0 for the new prop scheme. I've been an application developer here at Configura for about 3 years now. Currently working in the dev support role. That's pretty much it about me. So let's dive right in. So first of all, we're going to talk about some of the interface changes we have for the prop scheme. Then we're going to talk about runtime and behavior changes. Then we're going to talk about some of the new features that have been added. And then finally, we're going to get to the actual migration. I'm going to show you all some examples throughout. So, all right, so first of all, we have the interface changes. One of the biggest things we have here is the fact that all of the prop scheme stuff was moved from CM core to CM prop scheme. So everything related to the prop scheme is now self-contained in the prop scheme directory under CM core. So you have prop scheme apply animation, container, data, dialog manager, and the UI factory. That's all there. Then moving on to the interface changes for prop scheme. First of all, we have set scheme value. So this was changed to be final instead of being able to be extended. So if you're overriding this, you'll have to override the other implementation of it, which has undo record optional parameter passed in. So you can pass in true or false, whether you want it to be undoable or not. Then we have save scheme event. This used to return nothing. Now it returns a Boolean, whether it was successful or not. Then we have apply scheme. This was moved to final for the snappers implementation, though there is now also the option to pass in just a collection of objects, so it doesn't have to be snappers. And this is what you would be able to extend. Then we have check all recursive. You used to be able to extend this. That's no longer possible. Now you would extend check all recursive aux. So it's essentially like an auxiliary function for this method that you would override and do any of your custom stuff. So if you have anything in check all recursive overridden, you would want to move that to check all recursive aux. Then we have the scheme dialog window label. This was deprecated and changed into system name. Then we also have the dialog apply filter key. This was removed. And that's it for the changes in prop scheme. Then we had the ability to open schemes, the open scheme from quick prop. This was a prop def that used to exist. It no longer exists. So if you have streamed this, you need to clean that up on load. Otherwise, you could run into some load issues. Then in the prop scheme data, we had apply scheme, which used to have the option to pass in a scheme or not. It also used to not return anything. Now it returns a bool, whether or not it was successful. But now you also have to pass in a scheme. Then we have apply scheme down here that takes in a prop obj and an optional scheme. This now just returns a Boolean as well. So nothing with the parameters changed. Now it returns a Boolean whether or not it was successful. Then in the prop scheme container, there was a string-to-string map current. This no longer exists. So if you're using this, you'll want to take this into account because it's no longer there, or it will no longer be there in 11.0. Then we have the prop scheme manager. So this had 3 fields removed: the current apply filter, tag enables, and tag states. This also holds true for the UI factory. It had the same fields removed as well. Then in the prop scheme dialog, there were some general changes. We have the pre-build initialize method here used to be spelled incorrectly. Now it is actually spelled correctly for initialize. So you'll want to take that into account. Then we used to have select scheme, which took in a control and a tree view item. As part of a lot of the UI changes that we have, this no longer takes in a controller or tree view. Now it takes in a system key and a label. And then we have update scheme selector. This used to take in a tree view selector. Now it no longer does. And then we have the apply button A that used to exist. Now it has been replaced with apply button all and apply button select fields. So if you're using apply button A, you'll want to make sure you aren't using that anymore, or switch to the apply button all. I believe that's what replaced it. And then we have some changes for the prop scheme dialog saving and loading. First of all, we have open scheme here. Now it returns a Boolean. And we also have after load. So after you load a scheme, this is where you'd have a chance to do anything. Then we have save. It used to take in just a URL. Now it takes in the scheme to save and the URL and returns a Boolean whether it's successful or not. Then we have save scheme as. This now returns a Boolean for whether it's successful or not and takes in the scheme that you want to save. Then we have all key values. This was removed, add was removed, and filter save. These were all methods that were removed from the saving and loading pipeline for the prop scheme dialog. And this is one of the biggest changes. So for the prop scheme dialog, it is all now one window. So you used to be able to have like multiple windows or pop up or whatever. Now it is all under a singular window with context switching. So essentially each window is now just a context, and we swap that context out. It's a lot faster and also a lot neater, and you don't end up running into constraints with windows, with how many windows you can have at a time. So basically all of the functionality for having separate windows has been removed, and all of that stuff is gone. So there's a bunch of field removals, a bunch of method removals, and all of this is also available on the migration guide on the wiki. And I'll give you a link to that at the end. So now we're moving on to the runtime behavior changes. First up, we have prop scheme here. So the prop scheme constructor no longer calls init data. That is now built on demand. Then we have the prop scheme no longer toggles disabled by default, as default add values will call exclude all scheme prop defs. Then we have the prop scheme check all event and uncheck all events only apply to options in the current card instead of applying to all cards. Then we have calling init from prop scheme will now apply all options from the scheme, including ones that are unchecked. Then the default scheme is now streamed as part of preferences. So whenever you change the default, that will always be reflected between opening new drawings or closing CET and reopening that. So you can set up a default and not have to worry about it now, and get rid of all your undecided materials, unless you like undecided materials. Then also, save schemes persist on creation of new drawings. So whenever you create a scheme and save that, it will be there whenever you load or open a new drawing. Then for the prop scheme UI factory, append first default controls no longer draws the prop scheme check button. And then append last default controls no longer draws the prop scheme single apply button and prop scheme single apply animate button. The existing prop scheme push prop button is still drawn, and we have a new prop scheme apply toggle, which replaces the prop scheme check button. Then the prop scheme card window has been changed to not show card flaps. Now prop scheme dialog builds up the card selector instead for added flexibility. And then the prop scheme dialog. So a user can only propagate checked options that are in the currently selected card by default. There's a little toggle that you'll be able to change that to apply all the cards. And then the apply to selection has been replaced with a button that applies to the current space, selection, or drawing. The toggle state of an option is enabled when the user changes the option. And that is it for the prop scheme dialog. And now the new features. So first up, we have the Scheme Explorer. This is one of the really nice things of the new prop scheme system, and I'll show you this in real right now. So this is the Scheme Explorer. This is really nice. It will be populated by any custom manufacturer prop schemes. And then you'll be able to search by manufacturer or specific scheme in the search bar here. And it's an instant search. So if I type Fika, anything related to that pops up, or wall, that pops up. And you can import or export. And then if you click this back button, it'll return to the previous scheme. Also, if you close this window, it's supposed to go back to the previous scheme whenever you close out this window, but maybe that feature has changed. The next thing we have is the selection history and the preview snappers. So you have the preview snappers over here in the selection history. I'll also show this to you in the actual scheme. So the selection history over here is really nice. You have a max of 5 objects or groups of objects that will be in this history. You can lock them. So if you want to maintain that selection throughout selecting other things for whatever reason, if you want to possibly modify that multiple times, then you have that here. And then we have the preview snappers. And the preview snappers are really nice. And it's also on a per card basis. So you have, for panels, you have a panel. For work surface, you have the work surfaces. And then for storage, you have laterals, upper, and some storage here. And that's all something that you can control. And I'll get into that more here in a minute. Onto the actual migration. So first up, for the prop scheme itself. So for any scheme that is defined in a custom manufactured product, you will need to potentially override the following methods: group key, group name, group icon, system name, and icon. So by default, the only ones that you really actually have to override is group icon and icon, because the rest are based off of the package. So that's done at a base level at prop scheme. So unless you want to change that yourself to whatever you need it to be, it will be based off of the package instead. So for the preview snappers, this isn't required. It's an optional thing. You can opt into it. So in your to enable this, you'll need to implement the following interfaces on relevant snappers. So for relevant snappers, allow preview and preview snappers. So this would be so you implement this in the prop scheme itself. The card key is, so we had the panels, work surfaces, and storage card. So the card key is relevant to which card you're currently on. And then allow preview just allows it to use that system or not. Then we have the more properties dialog. This is a kind of boiled down scheme for the specific snapper that you're working with. So if I open this guy up again and I click on a panel and I bring up the more properties dialog, this is just a scheme window, a prop scheme window that is actually, it actually shares the same dialog as the prop scheme dialog. So if I were to open this guy, it would just take over the previous window. And then if I open more properties, it'll take over the window again. And this is specifically for this snapper, but you can click the show propagate tools, and this turns it more into like the actual prop scheme dialog, except you don't have the ability to go to the Explorer and all that. But you have your selection history here as well. And to enable this, the main requirement for this dialog is to make sure your snapper and scheme prop def keys match up. Other than that, you'll need to implement the scheme system key ref method. And the key here needs to start with an underscore. So it'd be something like underscore my scheme key. And then in your snapper's constructor, you need to make sure that you're calling init from prop scheme, which passes in the system key and the object and a prop ouch. And then by default, the system should pick up any relevant prop def keys from the prop def tracker. But if this doesn't fully work for you, then you would need to implement scheme props.
Zach, you don't have the slides up.
What?
It's showing CET. Yep, now it's fine.
Oh, man.
It's all right.
Well, I'm basically reading most of what's on the thing anyways. So, and the slides will be provided after the presentation. So that's it for the more properties dialog. Then we have the global scheme. This is a pretty neat guy. So essentially it turns a scheme into like a master scheme that's able to push its properties onto other schemes. And to enable this, you would just have to override allow propagate to scheme and accept propagate target. So an example of this is actually in Fika. And I'll show that to you real quick. So the FO master scheme, this guy implements the accept propagate target and allow propagate to scheme. This returns true, and then it has the ability to push its properties onto other schemes. Then we have one of the biggest workhorses of the prop scheme, which is the push prop visitor. So this guy is where you would do any kind of massaging of your keys or data. I believe you can do that as well. So all you would have to do is override the push prop visitor and provide it with a subclass one that does what you need it to do. An example of this is also in Fika, and I'll show that to you real quick. So we have the Fika Office Master Scheme Push Prop Visitor. So this has its visit method. Then the push props is overridden to call the proxy obj method here, which then just funnels down to key remap. So we're doing remapping of keys. So this is actually this particular implementation is allowing you to have a single key go in and potentially one or many keys come out. So you can apply to multiple props from this guy. It's pretty neat. And then we have the scheme selector button. So the nice little button that pops up in your library. To enable this, you would want to implement the library package and library function name methods. And then in your library function, you'll want to add the append scheme selector, which takes in your library lim parent, the package, the library function name, and the system key. And that will get you this button to bring up the scheme dialog, which has the scheme explorer and all that in it. And then there are some special cases where you might need to override same object in the prop scheme to enable undo, redo, and revert working properly. So there's some instances where like a undecided option can cause multiple undos to get into the undo chain, and that's not really desirable because you really just want one. So this allows you to override that so that you can be like, oh, this is undecided and this is undecided. Now they're actually the same instead of just doing a base. It's either doing a box comparison or an object-to-object comparison, which isn't necessarily completely, doesn't paint a necessarily complete accurate picture. So in cases like that, you would want to override this to get that functionality working properly. And then lastly, we have the ability to load old scheme files, so loading group schemes in. To enable this, you would override legacy group scheme keys and translate group to props. There is actually an example of this in the generic storage shelving, LT prop scheme. I'll show that to you real quick. So this basically just translates the group scheme stuff to the actual prop scheme stuff. And that's doing that here in these helper methods. And that's pretty much it. Any questions?
Zach, so when you say the old group scheme stuff, is that what's using the group codes? And it's not using props?
I believe it was using group codes, but I think there's other people that could answer this better than me.
What was the question?
So is the old group scheme stuff using the group codes, and now the new scheme stuff is using props?
No, they were using props before.
Using props before?
Yeah.
I see. Okay, thank you.
Well, sorry. So the old, like the really old group schemes were just using arbitrary keys, and those keys were only really meaningful to the scheme and how they got applied. Prop schemes is using like prop object keys. So yeah, group scheme or group codes never really got into any of this. That's specifically a data catalog thing.
Yeah, group scheme existed before data catalog existed, so they're not related.
All right, thanks.
Any more questions?
I got one question. Do you guys know about how long it's taken to migrate from the old ones to the new ones, like with these changes from 10.5 to 11.0? Is that something you can reasonably answer, or might be a tough one?
I think Akash can actually answer this because he did some of this while he was creating the system.
Okay.
Yeah, so I tried to migrate two partners extensions. I don't think I'm allowed to say who and who here,
Sure,
but
sure, that's fine.
but it took about, I think, about half a day to a day at most. I think it matters on how much your extension changes the contents of the dialog. So Zachary showed you the Fika the scheme dialog. So if you had that dialog.
Let me.
Just the scheme dialog. Yeah. So because we changed a lot of stuff here, uh, you may have more pain if you change a lot of stuff in here. But if you did not change how this dialog looks a lot, it's generally should be done within a day. I feel
Okay.
in most cases,
So
because this is the daunting part really. If you extend and like expect these controls to exist or these behaviors to exist, then you're going to have to spend a bit more time.
Hmm.
So this is really the question mark part that
Okay.
you can only answer. But if this doesn't apply to you, then with a
Yep.
day.
yeah, it's really just this page right here that causes a lot of the potential headaches.
Yeah.
One other question. Is this changing to this new prop scheme, is this mandatory? Like our old prop scheme won't work going forward with 11.0?
Since no one's answered yet, the answer is yes. So if you use prop scheme before, it is a mandatory migration to this version of prop scheme in 11.0.
Okay, thanks.
I do have one question as well. So regarding that filter that is on the upper right corner in the schemes dialog, do we need to do anything to integrate with that portion of, or is this something that's done automatically?
So this thing, so previously in the schemes dialog, we had a place to select tags to apply on the bottom. So we basically revamped that whole section because it got really cluttered the moment you have a lot of tags and categories to be selection based. So you could go in here and do that. So this by right by default picks up all the categories you see here come from the filter tool. So Zachary, if you go to tools on CET and open up filters, filter, yeah, that one. So if your, I guess it opened a different screen. Yeah. So if your categories register here, they'll show up there.
Cool, thanks.
So just get it in here and it's all set. And that also means that if users have strange issues with this tool, it would also show up in the tool in prop scheme. Also, this is just a bonus thing. If you could close the Fika scheme dialog and then go to tools and then selection, advanced selection, or we renamed it to advanced selection. Yeah. So that same very tool can be used outside of the scheme dialog actually. And when you launch the scheme dialog now, it will actually pop into the dialog. Yeah. So it is used, it's let me calm down. So it's used, you're thinking of it as a way to expand on the concept of selections in CET. It's a bigger tool than just being in the scheme dialog, but for now it's part of the scheme dialog.
Okay, and on the same topic, what does that wand button right on the bottom there does?
So there used to be a select units and apply tool.
Let's get some payments.
So you probably have to change some. There we go. So that's what it does. It would basically start an animation and start applying the scheme on the selected snappers that you pick. So it's a tool. If the previous icon on prop scheme was also a wand, so so yeah.
All right. I guess we can call it there then. Everybody have a good day.